states where it's more expensive to run, you do see fewer working class people. You basically, the more the legislature resembles Congress and the less it resembles like a city council, the more like Congress it is, the fewer working class people who get in. It's not just Maine. This is every state. You know, the barriers to getting into office. You can make them higher by extending the legislative session, by making it a regular schedule where you're on and then you're off, and that's a recipe for making it difficult for people who aren't sort of independently wealthy, people who can't, you know, just say to the other partners, take over my cases at the law firm. I mean, this isn't to say it's still tough. I've talked to lawyers who say, yeah, it's very tough to you know, I bill by the hour, and it's tough for me to take time off work. But I say, well, is it as tough as somebody who maybe doesn't have health insurance or who's going paycheck to paycheck? Well, no, it's not that hard, they'll say. So I mean, this is a nationwide, you know, pattern that we see just about everywhere. What I'm really struck by is the big explanations I always hear for what are the barriers that prevent working people from running for office. If you ask people who are white-collar professionals themselves, they'll tell you, well, it's voters and it's qualifications. There just aren't enough blue-collar workers who have what it takes, and voters, you know, voters like white-collar professionals, and my own research, I think you can just, if you actually look at the data, both of those ideas are just flat wrong. I mean, I can show you the statistics, I can show you the surveys. What really seems to keep working people out of office are just the practical hurdles.
In terms of practical hurdles, also, in terms of the low salary and compensation for serving in public office, what kind of a role or impact does the cost of running for office have also? What are your thoughts on that, each one?
I think it's a compelling argument for public financing.
Yeah.
But we're moving in the opposite direction now. We're starting to eliminate some of the gains that were made in terms of public financing in our own state. I just want to say something about what you suggested, Nick, and that is, I'm not sure what to call it exactly. It's a kind of an elitism, and it's
exactly
insidious.
Yeah.
And you know, some of us may be familiar with this book. It was written a long time ago, but it's nonetheless valid today. Patricia K.O. Sexton, a scholar in what was New York system of higher education. I can't remember if it was SUNY or whatever, but she wrote, based on all of her research and everything, a book called The War Against Labor and the Left. And she has documented in that publication, the results of her research, that there has been an ongoing war against working people in this country. This is just an example of it. This came out just before World War II. And, you know, it's got Uncle Sam protecting our shores against the likes of Bolsheviks, Reds, agitators, organizers, which they refer to as disorganizers, and labor and those who would disrupt business. And it's pretty vicious. And when you know that the clouds were gathering over the world in terms of World War I, this was scary stuff. And so workers were really under threat. In fact, many did go to jail. There were Palmer raids, all kinds of stuff going on that was just very, very insidious. And what I'm suggesting is taken from a lot of her work, is that there has been a knowing approach on the part of government and business in this country, going all the way back to maybe even before the Industrial Revolution, that says workers have their place and they need to be kept in that place. And what we need is what Ronald Reagan said, willing workers who are willing to work under the terms and conditions laid out by government regulations and by business. And so I think there's no psychic reward for people to run for office because they're denigrated at every turn. And some of the things that you suggested just further enhances that. It's like, it's as though working people don't have any clue about what's going on. And yet, We know from our own personal experience. In so many ways, they have a much broader and much deeper understanding of what it's like to work in a shop, an office, a factory, a classroom, and struggle for what I would say are pretty meager wages and try to support a family.
Yeah, and struggle to put food on the table and go to the doctors. And I think I'd like to maybe talk a little bit more like how do we break down some of this stuff? Like what do we do to get the Maine legislature back to 19% blue collar, you know? And I think programs like candidate training programs, so the AFL-CIO just did theirs last weekend, which is a great 2-day training for workers on how to run for office. I think I'd like to see that expanded to be more like the Emerge model, which is a 6-month training program, which is 2 days a month for 6 months. For Emerge, you have to be enrolled as a Democrat and a woman to go through the program. So how can we open that up to working class people who share, you know, a worldview that is based in, you know, healthcare is a human right, and everybody should be able to put food on their table, and we all need a living wage. You know, how do we expand that model to more people? Because, you know, there are a lot of folks that go through that program that do end up running. We hear a lot about the folks that run for state house and state senate, but there are a lot of women who run for local office as a result of going through that program and building up their confidence and gaining the skills and understanding of what it takes to run and what it takes to run and win. Which I think I have had lots and lots of conversations with lots of people who are considering running for office, or I've tried to talk people into running for office that should run for office. And I think, like I said earlier, a lot of it has to do with confidence and time, because we do a pretty decent job here in Maine of the money side of things, right? Clean elections, though it's been under attack for the last few years, is still intact. We got some matching funds back, kind of. It's still there. We got a long way to go, but it could have been worse. And it's still there. We can still do $5 checks. We still do seed money. If, you know, an out-of-state corporation comes in and dumps money at the end of the election, we can go collect more $5 checks, which we weren't able to do, you know.
Let me ask a question. I mean, I know when term limits were introduced in Maine that something happened with the numbers of women in the state legislature, that Maine used to be one of the top states for women in the legislature. We're around maybe like the second most. And we're not like way at the bottom or anything, but we've dropped down to maybe about 14, 15, something like that. I wonder if there's been anything, if that also had an impact on working class legislators. And I'm not exactly sure why it would have that impact. I don't even know why it had that with women. It may be that, you know, once, it's a bigger barrier for someone. I think what it might be is it's a bigger barrier for someone to run the first time.
Yeah.
You know, who's not the norm candidate. So, but if someone's run and they've gotten elected, then they can keep getting re-elected. But if you have to then start with some open seat and recruit a new candidate, then it may be harder. You know, it's for at that point, you know, to get someone who's not, you know, male, professional. I don't know exactly if that's what it is, but do you think that the term limits has had an impact?
Let me just pop in here with one response. When you're talking about that period of time when there was a lot of women, a lot more than there is currently, in the legislature, I will tell you that a significant majority of those women were working class women. Nancy Clark was a teacher. Edie Bollier worked in a factory down in Westbrook. The list goes on. It was quite amazing. I think there's a correlation there. It's not just working people, but I think opening it up because of the efforts of the AFL-CIO. And one thing that I would just say too, this is important. I know I hesitate to bring it up in this group, and given all that's going on right now in our Congress, the AFL-CIO in this state knew it had Republican members and Democratic members. And it always got and secured a hospitality room at the Democratic convention and the Republican convention. And out of that came the involvement of such personages as we've talked about, like Roland Sampson and John Patrick, but also Walter Burt, who was a lifelong Republican. He was born a Republican. He didn't know anything else. He was from Millinocket or East Millinocket. And Walter Burt was a terrific legislator, and he kept his colleagues, his co-workers, kept electing him. There were other such examples like that, and I don't want to go on and on because others have some things to say too. But I think when the labor movement in our state kind of closed its mind to the idea of all Republicans being evil, we cut off a lot of people who had that working class background. They just happened to be born into Republican families. And in Maine, prior to the 1940s, that was probably 99 and 44, 100% of the population.
So like staying focused on like working family issues, right? Regardless of party, is really, really important because there are a lot of working class Republicans, and so that struggle to put food on their table, that don't have health insurance, that want their kids to go to Head Start, that believe we should have, public pre-K.
Jimmy, and then I want to come back to Amy's comment.
Well, I work for the UPS Teamsters Union, and we have the largest privately held contract in North America. And in our contract, and I'm one of them, that I could leave for any reason and have the union pay me and pay my benefits, and UPS has to abide by that. So politically, I was thinking, and I don't know if you could do this or not, couldn't it be mandated that if a union, whether you have a contract or not, can it go outside that contract realm and say, if the union wants to pay for this guy to come out and run for legislature, couldn't we mandate that legally within the state government, federal government, and say, have them vote to say, like, we're going to force the employer to allow that support from the union for this person to run for office. And if it could happen, it would possibly be at least a start. And I don't know if that is legally viable, even though we have a binding contract. Could that still be forced if the legislature voted that way?
As long as it's in your contract, it's as good as law. But for those people who have no union, for those people who have no contract, they are employees at will. And so, and I doubt that such a law, I would defer to those with better legal backgrounds than mine, but I would suspect that if the state legislature or the Congress passed a law that entitled union workers, for example, to be able to run for office and not suffer any sanctions or recrimination, that would be declared unconstitutional because it's not all people, it's a select group, and so therefore it would be discriminatory.
Then why don't we
for
just,
all people?
yeah, make it all people?
Well, it's like you said,
That would be a hell of an issue to run.
Yeah, but it's
Whether
like you said, we're
it's
an at-will state.
unconstitutional or not, who's going to
But
say no?
we do it for military service.
That's true.
Right.
That's true. Only in the
So-
federal.
But the military shouldn't be throwing its people, I'm sure it does, but it's not going around firing people out of its military like
But for the guard, right? Like if you serve in the guard, then you get deployed, you're by law, your job has to be there when you get back,
Yep.
right?
I'm not suggesting that the company has to pay for this guy to run for office. I'm just saying that
It can't be
he's
fired.
allowed to do it, or she's allowed to do it. And she is allowed to miss that work and come back when she can and he can and still represent, because
For to
that's the
serve an
basis.
office, I'm kind of horrified to hear that they're preemptively, laying you off, even before you have to go serve, sometimes if they're anticipating that
Right.
you're gonna go serve in the state legislature,
Well, like you said, and John said, if you have it in your contract, then you're good to go, but if you don't have a contract, which most people in the state of Maine don't, we're at will, they can get rid of you for any reason as long as they don't make it really public whether, they do. They don't even have to give you a reason, just you're done. So, that's certainly part of the problem. Getting back to, the term limits and stuff like that, I thought that you know, that's how I actually get in. You know, I come from the area that John Martin represented for forever. And, you know, if he hadn't been termed, then, you know, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to run the first time. So, you know, I was originally a big supporter in term limits, but after you get into the legislature and see, you know, it's the lobby that has the institutional knowledge. And, you know, and it doesn't matter to me, you know, if it's a man or a woman, you know, it's working class issues. I mean, I've supported Libby Mitchell, Hannah Pingree, Janet Mills, I mean, you know, wholeheartedly. You know, if they had the heart, then I was with them 100%. I don't care if it's a man or a woman. But, you know, so I don't know what you were talking on the street about, you know, the time period, you know, why or what. But as far as term limits, you know, I think I've come around that I don't really like them as much as, and I'll never have been term limited out because one way or the other, I'm done this time. But I just think that, you know, and a comment was brought up, John, by yourself. I mean, when I first ran, I was a Republican. Got elected as an independent and served on the Labor Committee for 10 years. And I think probably the Republican you were talking about doesn't exist anymore because, by gosh, the people that I seen on the Labor Committee, there wasn't much that they didn't want to take away from working class people. And in this past session, you know, Medicaid expansion, I mean, a great deal for the state. You know, working class people were the ones that were going to benefit the most. And you know, people standing up and talking about, well, those able-bodied people don't need health insurance and all that. And it really is sad that we're in a state where 186 of us, including the governor, have health insurance, but we're deciding who else can have health insurance. It's embarrassing. It really is. And for me, probably the biggest advantage to being the state legislator personally is the fact that I have health insurance. And to be standing there and arguing who can have it and who can't is really sick to me. And here we are with the government shutdown right now, and that's what they're debating, is if people should have health insurance in this country. You know, so, and who's doing it? Unfortunately, those Tea Party Republicans, which it's infuriating to me, and it's, you know, I mean, really, it makes me think back to why I wanted to run for legislature to begin with, because there just, you know, there needs to be someone there that's, I mean, and I'm sure there are, but there needs to be people that are speaking up for people that need health insurance, because it's out of reach of most people that truly have to work for a living. And that's sad in a country like we have today.